I always believed Emma and I had something special. We met in college when life was simpler, and I was sure we'd grow old together. We had 2 wonderful daughters, a lovely home, and although our relationship wasn't flawless, it felt solid. At least that's what I convinced myself. Looking back now, I see how naive I was. The warning signs were there, but I chose to ignore them. Things started to shift about a year ago when Emma got a new job she was thrilled about. It was with a high-profile politician named David. He was the type who always wore a suit, exuding charisma and authority. I remember her returning home from their first meeting, practically glowing. I attributed it to excitement about the job, but I should have known better. Initially, her late nights and constant phone use didn't worry me. I assumed work was just hectic. But then little things started adding up. She stopped being affectionate, not just physically, but emotionally too. It was as if she was there in body, but not in spirit, and I couldn't figure out why. One night after a tough day at work, I asked how things were going at the office. She brushed me off with a fine in that dismissive tone that told me not to ask further. That word haunted me. It was always just fine, but I knew something was wrong. Our intimacy disappeared at first. I thought it was stress, but soon realized she had completely lost interest. She didn't even bother making excuses anymore. When I tried to address it, she'd snap, accusing me of being paranoid. "Why are you always so suspicious?" she'd say, dripping with irritation. It hurt, but I kept dismissing it as a rough patch. Then one Friday, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I came home early, hoping to surprise her. The kids were at their grandparents' for the weekend, so I thought we might reconnect. But when I walked in, the house was dark, and Emma was nowhere to be found. I called, but she didn't answer. Hours passed before she finally came home around 10 p.m., dressed far too nicely for just working late. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Work," she replied flatly, not even meeting my eyes. Until 10 on a Friday, I couldn't hide my disbelief. "Yeah, work doesn't stop at 5, Jack," she shot back, daring me to question her further. "Who works that late?" I pressed. "David does," she said smugly. "Some of us have real jobs." She mentioned David more and more, and it was driving me crazy. Though I'd never met him, it felt like every other word out of her mouth was about him. Whenever I tried to probe, she'd shut down or get defensive. "I'm going to bed," she suddenly said, cutting me off and walking away, leaving me standing there feeling like a fool. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, unable to ignore the nagging thoughts that I kept burying because I didn't want to face the truth. The turning point came a few weeks later when I was working from home, and Emma's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She'd left it behind when she rushed out for work. A message popped up from someone named D. My stomach churned. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but my curiosity got the best of me. I opened the message, and there it was, a string of flirty texts that no married woman should be sending to anyone but her husband. As I scrolled up, I found messages that went far beyond innocent flirting. I felt like I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a gut feeling anymore, it was real. Emma was having an affair. I sat at the table, staring at her phone, feeling like my world had collapsed. How long had this been going on? Did she even care about us anymore? About the kids? About me? The rage bubbling up inside was almost too much to bear, but I held it in. I needed time to think, to decide what to do next. When she came home that night, I acted normal, but inside, I was seething. I knew I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed undeniable proof. I wanted to catch her in the act, to show her I wasn't the clueless husband she thought she could fool. So, I waited and plotted. In the days that followed, I couldn't get those messages out of my head. Every time Emma walked into the room, my skin crawled. It felt like I was living with a stranger. I observed her closely, searching for signs, anything that would confirm the truth I was struggling to accept. She seemed unbothered, almost carefree, as if she had no clue what I had uncovered, and that only made it worse. I would lie awake at night, barely catching any sleep, just staring at her beside me, wondering how long she had been deceiving me. It consumed me inside. I wanted to confront her, yell, demand answers on how she could do this to our family. But I wasn't ready for the fallout, not yet. Instead, I chose to dig deeper. I needed more than a few incriminating texts. I needed undeniable evidence, something I could confront her with that would leave her no room to deny it. One night, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone again. This time, I dug deeper, searching through emails, photos, anything I could find. My heart pounded as I scrolled through weeks, maybe months, of secret exchanges with David. It was far worse than I had imagined. Hidden meetings in hotel rooms, late nights in his office. There were pictures, not explicit, but enough to make my blood boil. The messages spoke of her frustration with our small, mediocre life and how David offered her something more. More of what? More lies, more betrayal? My hands shook as I read on, but I couldn't stop. The deeper I went, the more I realized this wasn't just a fling. She was planning something far bigger. One message caught my eye. Soon we'll have everything we deserve. She had sent it just 2 days earlier. I stared at those words, trying to grasp what she meant. What did they deserve? I pieced together their conversations, and it hit me Emma wasn't just cheating, she was planning to leave me. Not only that, but she intended to take the kids, the house, and whatever else she could grab. David was influential, and from what I could tell, he had the means to support her. She was gambling on him, believing he could offer her a better life, and she was ready to abandon our family to make it happen. My heart raced as the truth sank in. She wasn't merely unfaithful, she was orchestrating her escape. That's when my anger shifted. It wasn't just about her betrayal anymore, it was about revenge. If she thought she could just walk out, take everything we built, and start fresh with him, she was sorely mistaken. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stayed up, plotting my next move. The following day, I made the first move. I reached out to Ben, an old friend who worked in its security. We hadn't spoken in a while, but he owed me a favor. I explained that I needed help setting up surveillance on Emma's phone. He didn't ask too many questions and set me up with what I needed: ways to track her movements and record her conversations. It felt wrong, like I was sinking to her level, but I had to protect myself. I couldn't let her blindside me with whatever she had planned. So over the next few days, I started collecting everything: texts, calls, photos, whatever she had saved. The more I gathered, the more disgusted I became, but I knew it would pay off in the end. The final piece fell into place the following Friday. Emma had been evasive all week, but that morning she seemed almost cheerful. She left the house earlier than usual, dressed a bit nicer than she typically did for work. I could sense something major was about to go down. After she left, I checked the tracking app Ben had installed. It didn't take long to see where she was heading: a downtown hotel. My heart raced as I grabbed my keys and drove there. I couldn't just sit at home and wait anymore, I had to see it for myself. When I arrived at the hotel, her car was already parked next to a sleek black Mercedes, which had to be David's. I waited, my nerves on edge. I wasn't sure what I would do if I saw them. Part of me wanted to storm in and cause a scene, but I knew I needed to stay composed. After an hour, they emerged. Emma came out first, smiling, her arm linked with David's. They looked like teenagers sneaking out of class, not like two people wrecking families. My hands shook as I snapped a few photos. It was all the proof I needed, but I wasn't going to stop there. I followed them, irrational and desperate to see how deep this went. They went to lunch at some fancy restaurant across town, laughing and whispering, oblivious to everything around them. Watching them, carefree and content, made me sick. That's when I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. No, they were going to face the consequences of their actions, but I wasn't going to blow up then, and there I needed the perfect moment, and it was coming soon. By the weekend, I had enough evidence to destroy everything they had built on lies. Emma had no clue what was coming, and the thought of her obliviousness was the only thing keeping me grounded. Each time she smiled at me or acted like nothing was wrong, I felt a twisted satisfaction, knowing her entire world was on the brink of collapse. But I wasn't ready to strike just yet. I wanted her to feel safe, to believe she was still in control. So I kept quiet, biding my time, letting her sink deeper into the mess she and David had created. It wasn't just about their affair anymore, it was about how far they were willing to go to ruin me. On Saturday morning, she woke up early, grinning, dressed in a tight black dress that was far too fancy for a casual day at work. She didn't even bother hiding her excitement anymore. "I'm heading out for a bit," she said nonchalantly, sipping her coffee as if she were heading to a yoga class. "David's got a big corporate event tomorrow night, and we're doing some final prep." I nodded, pretending not to care. "Need any help with the kids?" I asked. She waved me off. "No, they're going to my mum's tonight. I'll be busy all weekend." That was Emma, always meticulous, making sure her lies were wrapped up perfectly. She thought she had everything under control. "Okay," I said, not pushing further. I could see she was in a hurry, her eyes darting to her phone, likely waiting for a message from David. As soon as she left, I sat at the kitchen table, staring into my coffee, trying to process what I was about to do. Part of me wondered how it had come to this: 15 years of marriage, 2 kids, a home we built together, and now it was all falling apart. But this wasn't just about protecting myself anymore, it was about making sure she didn't walk away unscathed, and neither would he. By Sunday afternoon, everything was set. Emma had barely been home all weekend, only stopping by to grab a few things, always in a rush, constantly checking her phone. I didn't need to ask where she was headed, I already knew, but I kept up the act, smiling and pretending to be the clueless husband I had been for too long. That evening, when I dropped the kids off at her mum's, I found myself wondering if this would be the last time our family would ever feel whole again. I knew that after tonight, nothing would be the same. I kissed Sarah and Lily goodbye, telling them I'd pick them up in the morning. They smiled and waved, blissfully unaware of the storm about to hit. For that, I was grateful. They didn't need to know yet, but they would soon enough. Driving back, I checked the time. The event Emma had been busy with all weekend was set to begin in a couple of hours. David was hosting a lavish party at his company's headquarters, a grand networking gala where the city's most influential businessmen and politicians would gather to rub shoulders and talk deals. This was David's big moment to flaunt his power, and Emma was a key player, managing everything behind the scenes. How ironic, I thought, that she had no idea her carefully crafted world was about to fall apart in front of these very people. I arrived at the gala a little late, slipping in among the crowd. The venue was buzzing, everyone dressed to the nines, champagne glasses clinking, the usual mingling you'd expect at an event like this. I spotted Emma near the entrance, chatting with board members, her smile wide and false, like she was born for this role, and David, right at the center, shaking hands, laughing, commanding the room like he owned it. Seeing them together made me sick, but I kept my distance. I wasn't ready to confront them yet, I had something better planned. I maneuvered through the crowd and made my way to the control room where the audio-visual team was stationed. It didn't take much to convince them to let me take a look at the equipment. I was just a concerned husband wanting to check on his wife's hard work. They didn't think twice when I slipped a USB drive into the system and uploaded the audio I had prepared. Just a few more minutes, and the entire room would hear everything. From the shadows, I watched Emma and David, their smug expressions unbearable. They thought they had won, that they were untouchable. Little did they know, I was about to change everything. Finally, David stepped up to the podium to deliver his grand speech. The room fell silent as he cleared his throat, flashing that signature politician smile. He began talking about the company's success, praising the hard work that had gone into the event, throwing a glance at Emma as if she were his queen. The audience hung on his every word, unaware of what was about to happen. Then it started. In the middle of his speech, the audio cut out for a brief moment. Confused whispers rippled through the crowd as David's face tightened in confusion. Then, my recording began to play. At first, it was just casual chatter between David and Emma, one of their many flirtatious phone calls. The murmurs grew louder as people tried to make sense of what they were hearing. Then, it shifted to something far more damning: their plans, their affair, and the messages I had recorded. They spoke about their future together, about how Emma would leave me and take everything I had worked so hard for. The entire room froze. All eyes turned to Emma, who stood there pale and wide-eyed, her champagne glass slipping from her grip and shattering on the floor. David stood stunned, struggling to keep his composure, but it was too late. Their deceit was exposed for everyone to witness. The room buzzed with whispers as people exchanged shocked looks, some pulling out their phones to capture the chaos. Emma glanced around frantically, searching for an escape, but there was none. David, on the other hand, was already storming off, muttering angrily under his breath as his career began to unravel before his eyes. I stood back, watching it all play out, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sadness. I had brought them down, destroyed everything they had tried to build on lies, but as I watched Emma's world collapse, I couldn't help but feel a pang of loss. Despite everything, she had once been my wife, and no matter how much I despised her in that moment, I couldn't just erase the years we had shared. But it was over now. The room was in a frenzy, filled with shock and confusion, as David disappeared, leaving Emma standing alone, frozen in the middle of the wreckage. It was surreal to see her there, trapped in the chaos of her own making, with no way out. I could feel the crowd's eyes flicking back and forth between Emma and the exit, everyone waiting to see how she'd react. For the first time since I'd known her, Emma was at a loss for words. I didn't stay to watch the aftermath, I'd seen enough. I made my way out, slipping through the door before anyone noticed. The cold air outside felt sharp, but it was like a breath of relief after being in that stifling room. I leaned against my car for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. I had done it, I had exposed them both right in front of the people they were trying so hard to impress, but instead of feeling victorious, I felt empty. I had imagined this moment for weeks, expecting it to be satisfying to watch their lives fall apart. And while it was satisfying in a way, it didn't feel like the triumph I had envisioned. After all, Emma had been my wife, and there was a time when we were happy. But those days were gone, replaced by the bitter sting of betrayal. I got into my car and sat there, staring at the steering wheel, wondering what would come next. The girls were still at Emma's mom's, and I wasn't ready to involve them in this yet, but after tonight, there was no turning back. They'd have to know sooner or later. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. There was one last thing I needed to do before this was over. I called Ben, my friend in it, who had helped me set up the surveillance. "It's done," I said when he answered. "Did everything go according to plan?" he asked. "Yeah," I replied, rubbing my temple. "Better than I expected." Actually, he whistled quietly. "So, what's next?" I didn't answer right away. "I need the rest of the footage from Emma's phone. Can you send it to me?" "Sure, no problem," Ben said, sounding serious now. "I'll email it to you in an hour." "You sure about this, Jack?" I hesitated for a moment. "Yeah, I'm sure." I hung up and drove home, my mind racing. The footage I was waiting for wasn't just about their affair, it was more than that. Over the past few weeks, as I gathered evidence, I realized David was not just involved with Emma, he was tangled up in shady business deals that went far beyond their relationship. Money laundering, tax evasion, political favors, it was all there in their private conversations. Initially, I hadn't planned on using that information, but now it seemed like the final nail in the coffin. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for the email. The house felt emptier than usual. Every room and piece of furniture reminded me of the life Emma and I had built. I glanced at the photos on the wall, pictures of us on vacations, smiling and happy. It was hard to believe those moments had ever been real. I wondered how long she had been pretending. My laptop chimed with a new email. I opened it to find the files. Ben had sent hours of recorded conversations between Emma and David. I scrolled through, looking for the parts I needed, and it didn't take long to find them. The recordings were explicit, detailing bribes, secret deals, and favors traded behind closed doors. This was no longer just an affair, it was corruption at its core, and I knew exactly what to do with it. The next morning, I contacted an old acquaintance from high school who worked at a local news outlet. We weren't exactly friends, but I knew he'd be interested in what I had. This story wouldn't just end David's career, it would expose his entire political network. Within hours, I was sitting across from him in a small cafe downtown, sliding a USB drive across the table. "What's this?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Let's just say it's a career-ending scoop," I replied, sipping my coffee. For a politician who's been playing dirty for a long time, he looked skeptical at first, but when he plugged the drive into his laptop and started listening to the recordings, his eyes widened. "Holy, this is huge." "I know," I said, leaning back, "and it's all yours." He was quiet for a moment, scrolling through the files. "Why are you giving me this?" "Let's just say I have a personal interest," I replied, keeping things vague. "David's been messing with people's lives for too long, including mine. It's time someone brought him down." He nodded slowly. "I'll need to verify this, but if it's legit, this could be front-page news. You realize this will be the end of him, right?" "That's the idea," I said, standing up. "I trust you'll know how to handle it." I left the cafe without looking back. It was out of my hands now. By the end of the week, the story would break, and David's world would crumble. His connections, his money, his influence, it would all be gone. And Emma? She'd be collateral damage. The press would dig into her role, and while she might avoid jail time, her reputation would be shattered. She'd lose everything she had schemed for. It was late by the time I picked up the girls from Emma's mum's house. Sarah and Lily were tired, their little faces scrunched in confusion when I told them they were coming home with me. They asked why their mum wasn't picking them up, and I kept my answers vague. I wasn't ready to explain everything just yet. All I told them was that plans had changed and they'd be staying with me for a while. As I tucked them into bed that night, I sat on the edge of Sarah's bed for a moment, watching her drift off to sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about what was coming next. Tomorrow morning, the article would be published. The entire city would learn the truth about David, and everyone would see who Emma had become. Our marriage, our life, it would all be laid bare for the world to see. And for the first time since all this began, I felt an odd sense of peace. I was finally free. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling the weight of what was about to unfold. I brewed a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. The story was already live, plastered across the front page of every news outlet in town. Politician David Braun exposed in shocking scandal. I read through the article, my eyes skimming the lines that confirmed what I already knew: David's career was finished. The recordings, the financial records, the details of every shady deal he'd made were all laid out for everyone to see. It wasn't just about his affair with Emma anymore, it was about corruption, bribes, and the dirty money he used to boost his career. There were quotes from politicians, legal experts, even his colleagues. Everyone was distancing themselves from him now. He was toxic. I checked my phone, no messages, no missed calls from Emma, but I knew it wouldn't be long before she reached out. Sure enough, less than an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was her. I stared at her name on the screen, hesitating for a moment before finally answering. "Jack," she said, her voice shaky like she'd been crying. "Please, can we talk?" I didn't respond right away. Part of me had been waiting for this, imagining what I'd say when she finally called, desperate and broken. But now that the moment was here, the anger that had driven me for weeks was gone. All I felt was emptiness. "Talk about what?" "Emma," I said quietly, my voice calm. "You've already said it all." There was silence on the other end, just the sound of her trying to hold back tears. "I didn't know it would go this far," she whispered. "Didn't what?" I interrupted, my tone hardening. "Didn't know that sleeping with your boss and helping him destroy lives might have consequences. Or didn't care, Jack, please," she sobbed. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I was confused. I made a mistake. But we can fix this. We can fix us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She still thought there was something left to save. After everything, the lies, the betrayal, the destruction, I let out a bitter laugh. "Fix us?" I shook my head. "Emma, there is no us anymore. You destroyed that a long time ago." She started crying harder on the other end of the line. I wanted to feel something: satisfaction, anger, maybe even pity, but I didn't. All I felt was tired. I was done. There was no going back. I had already made my peace with that. "What do you want me to say?" I asked, my voice softer but still cold. "That I forgive you? That everything will be okay?" "It won't," and you know that. Her sobs quieted, and I could hear her trying to compose herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible, "for everything. I know I've ruined us, and it's all my fault. But the girls, Jack, please, I need to see them." I hadn't planned on keeping the kids from her. As much as I despised what she'd done, I wasn't going to stop her from being their mother. But this was different now. It wasn't just about the affair. Her involvement with David, his shady dealings, his corruption, it wasn't something I could ignore. I had to protect the girls. "You'll see them," I said after a long pause. "But not right now. They don't know anything yet, Emma. I'm not dragging them into this mess. I'll tell them when the time is right." "When?" she asked, her voice trembling. "When can I see them?" "When the dust settles," I said firmly, "and only if you keep all of this away from them." There was another long pause before she spoke again, her voice small and broken. "Okay," I hung up, feeling a strange sense of finality. This was it, the end of us. The day crawled by. I spent it with the girls, keeping things as normal as I could. We played board games, watched movies, and for a few hours I allowed myself to forget everything happening outside our little world. But every time I looked at them, I felt the weight of what I was about to tell them. They deserve to know the truth, but how do you explain something like this to your kids? How do you tell them that the family they've known will never be the same again? That evening after dinner, I sat them down. Sarah, my oldest, sensed something was off. She looked up at me with those big, curious eyes, waiting for me to speak. "Dad, is something wrong?" she asked. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yes, sweetheart, there's something I need to talk to you both about." Lily, my youngest, sat beside her, fiddling with her fingers. She didn't say a word, just watched me quietly. I tried to find the right words, but there was no easy way to say it. So I told them the truth. I told them that their mum and I wouldn't be together anymore, that things had happened between us that couldn't be fixed. I didn't mention the affair or the scandal. I wasn't going to burden them with that. I just told them we had grown apart and that it wasn't their fault. Sarah's face crumpled, tears filling her eyes. "Is it because of us? Did we do something wrong?" My heart broke. "No, Sarah, you didn't do anything wrong. This has nothing to do with you or your sister. We both love you more than anything in the world." Lily started crying, her little body shaking as she leaned into me. I pulled them close, holding them as they cried, feeling like the worst father in the world for putting them through this. but I knew it was the right thing they needed to know, and they needed to hear it from me. After what felt like forever, they finally fell asleep, curled up on either side of me. I stayed there, sitting with them, watching their faces as the reality of what had just happened set in. There was no turning back now. We were a broken family, and no amount of pretending would change that. The next morning, I filed for divorce. The process was long and painful. At first, Emma tried to fight it, begging me to reconsider. But as the media frenzy around David's scandal grew, she became more and more withdrawn. The last time we saw each other in person, Emma looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew. Whatever dreams she'd had of a future with David had completely crumbled. He was now facing charges, his career in ruins, and Emma had been dragged down with him. Our divorce was finalized a few months later, and I was granted full custody of the girls. Emma moved out, and though she still saw them on weekends, the bond between her and the kids was strained. They didn't fully grasp what had happened. They were too young to understand the full weight of it all, but they could sense the change, something deep and irreversible. Despite my efforts to shield them from the worst, they could feel the fractures. As for me, I moved on, slowly. It was far from easy. The anger and betrayal lingered for a long time, but eventually, I learned to live with it. I put all my energy into the girls, focusing on rebuilding our lives, on creating something new from the ruins of what we once had. I never heard from David again. Word was that he had fled the country to escape prosecution. Emma tried to rebuild her life, but nothing ever returned to what it once was. She lost her job, her reputation, and the life she had desperately tried to create with him. In the end, all that remained for her was the wreckage of her choices. As for me, I finally found peace.